This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
This is Global Business Africa. Hello and welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe. As always, we begin with a look at the markets. The Nairobi Securities Exchange 20-share index ended the day in positive territory on the back of news that investors will need a minimum of about $9,100 to participate in the alternative investment funds under new rules published by Kenya's Capital Markets Authority. The new alternative funds will allow investors to put money into asset classes such as debt funds, equity and equity-linked investments, hedge funds, infrastructure funds and SME funds, which are normally not covered by the existing collective investment schemes. The Alternative Investment Fund targets sophisticated investors with higher risk appetite while also diversifying the asset classes available for investors in the country. Coming up on the show tonight, Nigeria to form coalition with affected countries to ensure that funding of fossil fuels continues. Private businesses are driving ties between China and African nations, according to a new report. And a look at some of the opportunities and entrepreneurs emerging as Somalia's online trade expands. We begin the hour in Afghanistan, where 2 explosions have taken place outside Kabul airport. According to the Pentagon, 43 people have been killed and 130 others injured. A U.S. official has confirmed that 4 U.S. Marines are among the dead. Children are reported to be among the dead. This comes after Western nations warned of an imminent attack and urged people to stay away from the airport area. The first blast occurred outside the airport's Abbey Gate, while the second took place at the nearby Baron Hotel. Thousands of people had gathered at the airport hoping for a flight out of Taliban-controlled Afghanistan when the blast happened. A number of people have since been evacuated and those injured rushed to emergency centers. And nearly 100,000 people have been airlifted out of Kabul, including several thousand American citizens. The U.S. says there may be as many as 1,500 Americans left to evacuate. Meanwhile, some Afghan Americans have shared concerns about their relatives and the future of Afghanistan.
I have friends who are still in Afghanistan. I have an aunt and a cousin who are in Afghanistan and their families. And what we're hearing is that the situation is getting worse daily.
West, especially Mr. Biden, did a big mistake to withdraw from Afghanistan. That's why we are suffering and paying for this humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, our people left behind. Yeah. And we are very sad. As an Afghan, as an American, as a human being, I'm very sad for this kind of situation. And the world has not seen this kind of situation before, you know. This was worse than Vietnam.
Nigeria is forming a coalition with other affected countries to stop attempted moves to hold funding of fossil fuel. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says mounting pressure towards zero emissions has been drying up investment for fossil fuel-related projects. Such a development would drastically affect oil-dependent economies like Nigeria. Wealthier nations and their institutions have banned all public investments in certain fossil projects, including natural gas. Osinbajo spoke at a virtual event. Let's talk about that in just a bit. But staying in Nigeria, and businesses in the nation's capital are lamenting the emission tax imposed on them by government. Authorities slammed the 100,000 naira, or just about $200 levy on farms that use generators or heavy-duty machinery. And this is despite the nation's inability to meet its electricity demand. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam tells us more.
Abdul Rahim Nuhu runs this printing business in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. For a business like his that's solely dependent on power supply, Nuhu spends at least $60 on electricity bills and another $50 on fueling his generator. New emission tax imposed by authorities is putting a strain on businesses like his, whose running costs are already choking.
It will affect the business because right away now, we are even running on a low sales. So we don't have much sales now. So and we don't have much sales doesn't guarantee us that we should not pay for shop rent. We should not pay for the other taxes that we are still paying for. Because nobody will give that excuse. So we need to pay what we are still paying. So if they want to add another tax now, I think it will affect our business much. And generator issue we are talking about, are we even happy that we are using generator? If we are having electricity all the time, they supply us, at least we don't need generator anymore.
Authorities say the emission of harmful substances from heavy-duty machines and generators is intolerable and the need to curb it inevitable. So businesses could pay as much as $200 or even more on emission taxes.
You know, international conventions allow for people to choose among options. Unfortunately, Nigeria don't have the option other than to use generator because power supply has remained permanently epileptic and is struggling to revive itself from the quagmire condition.
Nigeria's small and medium enterprise sector is the backbone of the economy. According to audit firm PricewaterhouseCoopers, the sector contributes 48% to the national GDP and it accounts for 84% of employment. Additional taxes would further impede the growth of businesses.
The gains we are seeing in inflation for 14.75 will perhaps increase to an amount that you don't want to know about. It could go back to 18, it could go back to 19%. Cost of goods and services will significantly increase. If producers are unable to manage it and transfer to final consumer, it's going to be evident in layoffs, which will increase unemployment figures. Not charge people extra tax for trying to produce, for trying to mop up unemployment rate, for trying to stabilize the economy.
Nigeria is rated 131 out of 190 countries in the 2019 Ease of Doing Business Index. Economic watchers recommend the government ramp up efforts to boost electricity supply and provide an enabling environment that encourages small businesses like Nuhu's to thrive. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Ronke Onadeko is a member of the expert advisory panel at the Nigeria Natural Resource Charter. She joins us now from Lagos. Thank you very much, Ronke, for your time. So we've just aired a story on the emission tax introduced by the Nigerian government as part of efforts by the country to curb emissions. The government has pledged to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2030. But given the gap in the supply of power, is this a case of putting the cart before the horse?
Well, thank you for having me on the program. But you see, everything is working simultaneously. This decade in Nigeria is the gas decade. So a lot of things are happening simultaneously. So yes, there is need and there are plans to cut down greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions in the country. And on the other side, on the other hand, we have a very concerted effort now of the government to stop burning gas from oil fields. There's a lot of gas gathering plans going on. There's a lot of gas to power initiatives going on. So all of these things are happening concurrently. And the full picture all ties in if the plan goes through exactly how the government plans for it to go.
So the oil and gas industry accounts for around 86% of Nigeria's total export revenue and around 10% of its GDP. What is going to be the impact of halting funding of fossil fuel projects for oil-dependent countries such as Nigeria?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, the interesting thing is that Nigeria has its foreign reserves abroad. It's a substantial amount of money. The Nigerian government just needs to get themselves together, speak to the international banks that are holding funds for us, and make sure we leverage our foreign reserves that are in the European market, China and the US, and make sure those things work for us in Nigeria so that we're not going cap in hand looking for financial institutions that are going to back fossil fuel projects in Nigeria.
So Nigeria's vice president says that this global transition to cleaner energy should be inclusive, it should be fair, he says. What kind of support do these countries such as Nigeria need to help with the global transition to the zero emissions?
First and foremost, I'm a little bit of a divergent person. We have natural resources in Nigeria, such as coal, that we have not fully exploited. I don't see any reason why Nigeria is not going to first exploit their coal before we start going into the renewables. And obviously, I mean, Nigeria is more a gas-rich country than an oil-rich country. So there is need for us to also exploit our gas, which is a cleaner fuel. And then we can start to look at the renewables, solar, hydro, before we, exhaust all the sources. So we have quite a long way to go before we catch up with the Western world and their drive for complete, move from fossil fuels to the renewables. And more than that, I mean, I know in the recent past, some of these countries were still tinkering with coal, especially in Europe, and nuclear forms of power. So everybody should leverage on what they have as natural resources, first and foremost, especially when it comes to cost, availability and accessibility for Nigerians.
But let's talk about those renewables that you mentioned. In 2011, Nigeria updated its renewable energy master plan, which outlined measures to increase the supply of renewable electricity from 13% of total electricity generation in 2015 to 23% in 2025 and then 36% by 2030. Where is the country currently in achieving that?
Wow, we're very, very far. I don't even think the needle has moved at all. We're battling with a lot of, not just the supply, but the transmission, the storage, the distribution, and also getting power into the rural areas. So our level of the areas where we need to focus on at the moment is more than anything else trying to make sure both the urban and the rural settings have electricity, means of transmitting the electricity there, minimal, distribution length, so we're not losing too much power between the source and the usage. So our issues are quite far away from us beefing up the quantity or the percentage of renewables that are going into the mix at the moment. I don't think that's the utmost priority for Nigeria at the moment. And I know that the government are paying it lip service, but not much has been done in that respect.
Okay, so now increasingly we're seeing and hearing talk all around the world about this global transition towards what they're calling the net zero emission. We're seeing some financial institutions such as the World Bank, in fact, cutting down on funding for such kind of projects. Now, Dangote comes, invests $1.5 billion in an oil refinery, which is projected to churn about 650,000 barrels per day. So given this global transition, could this end up being a failed investment?
Well, I don't think so. The need for the Dangote refinery cannot be overemphasized. Nigeria, as it is right now, we're a net exporter of crude oil and a net importer of petroleum products because we have very low refining capacity locally. However, I mean, it's pertinent to mention at this point that in Africa only constitutes 2 to 3% of carbon emissions in the world. So I don't know why the focus is on us to have to reduce our carbon emissions. You have countries like the US, India, China that are the major churners of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think the focus, we are not the ones who are making the rules. I think we need to lend our voice and get involved in the narrative to let them know the focus should not be on us at this time. The countries that are really churning out greenhouse gas emissions into the environment are the ones that need to find ways to manage that and reduce the emissions that they're putting in, because Africa apparently is the most vulnerable to these gases.
All right, Ronke Onadeko, thank you very much for your time. In some corporate headlines, South African retailer Woolworths Holdings is set to resume dividend payouts. This comes after its annual profit surged 212%, and the sale of some Australian properties helped to cut its debt. The company reduced net borrowings by over $68 million to $73.7 million. It adds that it will pay out a final dividend of 66 rand cents per share, marking a 25.8% decrease on the prior year's 89 cents. India has lifted its ban on Boeing's 737 MAX jet after it observed no untoward reporting on jets already flying. Since 17 global regulators allowed it to resume flights, shares in Boeing rose 0.4% to $222 before the start of regular trading in New York. India's aviation regulator is quoted as being satisfied that Boeing has met local requirements. Qantas Group has posted a loss of $1.7 billion amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The company says it expects Australia will reopen to international travel in December. Qantas says it has lost $11.6 billion in revenue since the pandemic began. It further adds that the lost revenue will likely exceed $14.5 billion by the end of this year. And Silicon Valley is embarking on a new pitch to persuade small companies to automate by hiring a robot. This follows a surge in sales of robots to big companies across America due to the high demand in wages by humans and better technology. Venture capitalists are now backing a new financial model: lease robots, install and maintain them, charge factories by the hour or month, and cut the risk and initial costs. That's a look at your corporate headlines. 16 minutes into the hour, you're watching Global Business. Coming up, some cheer for South Africa's alcohol industry as Heineken and Distell seem to conclude takeover talks by the end of September. And Uganda reviews some new tax measures to support business recovery after the coronavirus shocks.
Every story starts out like this. Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sunitra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
South Africa wine and spirits producer Distell says it will withhold its dividend for the 2021 financial year amid ongoing takeover talks with Heineken. The company adds that it has progressed in talks and it should be able to provide a more detailed update by the end of the third quarter. The companies have also set a deadline of September 30th for talks to be wrapped up. Distell reported a more than threefold rise in its headline earnings per share to $51 in the year to June 30th compared to $16 a year earlier. The profit jump came as Distell recovered from a lengthy coronavirus-related ban on alcohol sales in its home market, which hurt firms across the industry last year. All right, Angelo Coppola now joins us live from Johannesburg for more on this. Angelo, so Distell says it's going to conclude talks with Heineken about this takeover by the end of next month. Are there indications the deal will go through?
Well, look, Heineken at the moment are quiet on those discussions that it's having with Remgo, which is the majority shareholder of Distell. In their financial results statement issued yesterday, in fact, Distell boss Richard Rushton went on to say that there is no certainty that the remaining aspects will be successfully resolved and agreed. And if the deal does proceed, there are several conditions. You've mentioned one of them already, and one relates specifically to Distell not making any distributions, including dividend declarations. Just as a matter of interest, though, this deal is valued at around 2.6 billion euros if it does go ahead, Peninah.
Okay, so South Africa had a very strict lockdown last year, and that included a ban on sales of alcohol, total ban in fact. And yet Distell announced a more than threefold rise in annual profits. How did it manage these profits with a very difficult year?
Well, look, domestic revenues actually increased by 29.4%. Volumes were up around 28.7%, and that's despite losing 20% of the trading days because of those alcohol bans. Probably some of that was due to stockpiling by consumers when the shops were open, But added to that, the company also does business in several African countries, where revenue increased there around about 22.9% on 30.7% higher volume of sales, or sales volume, should I say. Volumes were up at 22% in Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Eswatini, while revenue grew by 22.4% in Nigeria, Ghana, Mozambique and Zambia. And then on the capital expenditure side, that decreased by over a third compared to the previous year. So a solid set of numbers all round, Peninah.
All right, so Angelo, in 2016, we saw the world's largest brewer, AB InBev, take over South African breweries. Now we have the world's second largest brewer, Heineken, taking over Distell. What makes South African, beer companies, or I should say South African beer, so lucrative and attractive to global investors?
Well, look, it's about brand dominance in the beer division or beer sector in South Africa. And also, remember, in African markets, because that's where SA Breweries also has an interest. Of course, SA Breweries was part of a bigger deal, and that saw AB InBev purchase the global brewer Miller, which is a US-based brewer, in fact, which had acquired SAB a few years earlier, and that's before AB InBev got involved. Access to the African market was one of the main reasons they bought SAB Miller at that stage. Analysts are forecasting, in fact, that beer sales in Africa could probably grow by nearly 3 times the global rate between 2014 and 2025. So it's more about the continental growth than about the SA beer market, Peninah.
Okay, and so how do South Africans feel about all of these takeovers, Angelo?
Well, look, it depends on what side of the fence you're sitting on, remembering that it's not a done deal just yet. As Labour, you want to be sure that you have a job if the takeover happens. Those concerns are generally the purview of the competition authorities, as was the case with SA when Miller bought SAB Miller or SAB in South Africa. If you're a shareholder of the target company, you'll want a premium on your stake and an option to buy into the expanded company. If you're a national treasury or government official, you'll want to keep that company headquartered in South Africa because of corporate tax collections. And if you're at the JSE, you'll want to keep that primary listing on the continent's biggest stock exchange. And then if you're a man or a woman on the street, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Peninah?
All right, Angelo, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Angelo Coppola live for us in Johannesburg. And staying in South Africa, insurers are strengthening their defenses against potential new waves of coronavirus infections as worse than expected mortality claims emerge from the ongoing pandemic. Angelo Coppola once again with the details.
Of the main insurers in South Africa, only Absa Life has released its financial results. The other players will release their results in the next 10 days. The results are likely to be mirrored by their competitors.
Last year, our excess claims, so higher than usual claims, was about 200 million. But just in the first 6 months of this year, we've seen that increase to 500 million excess claims. What's interesting is we can only attribute about a quarter of that directly to COVID-19, but it's similar to a trend we see in South Africa, where the COVID-19 death rate's about 3%, but the excess deaths are much higher.
As more vaccines have become available, the problem emerging now is vaccine hesitancy and its impact.
The one thing that we are monitoring is obviously the rollout of the vaccine program and the success of that. And in particular, as we've now sort of started to de-risk the availability of vaccines, as it seems to be a bit more stable, it's now about hesitancy and dealing with hesitancy and the right sort of information. So yes, the combined impact of that meant that we've needed to strengthen our reserves by another 800 million for further impact of waves of infection.
Absa Life was paying 3,000 claims a month prior to COVID-19. That jumped to 7,000 claims during the virus infection spikes.
Placed lots of strain on our actuarial areas in terms of modelling and what we need to model. But, operationally too. I mean, what we've seen, though, that's positive is that it has pushed a bit of an acceleration in digitization and self-service, so deal with those volumes.
Academics and modelers expect a fourth wave to strike South Africa in December. Many insurers are planning for that now.
So another thing we've done is we want our customers to enjoy their cover. Don't want it to lapse right now when they need it most. So we've also offered premium relief, so customers can miss an additional 2 premiums during the next 6 months without their cover lapsing.
Insurance is a grudge purchase at the best of times, but in these corona times, perhaps it's not a bad investment. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Uganda is reviewing some new tax measures that came into force in July. This is part of the government's response to the post-lockdown aftershocks that have ruined businesses and forced others to cut jobs to stay afloat. The government says the planned review of the 2021-2022 tax regime follows an outcry from the business community. CGTN's Michael Baleke has more.
Kampala's streets are bustling with activity. The government recently lifted the 42-day lockdown measures to control the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And while some businesses are slowly getting back on their feet, many traders here in the capital say they are struggling to pick up the pace.
This is now a trying moment for traders, all the traders, because we're facing quite a lot. First of all, the rent issue, the taxes, the KCC, everything is a mess because we have not been working for quite long, like 2 months. And now you have come to open up a shop, and what they tell you, like, you know what, you need to pay the 2 months for your rent.
Shams says the debts are up his neck, yet he's not making enough from his sewing machine trade. But the Uganda Revenue Authority says it is moving to review some taxes to help businesses recover.
There has been a conversation ongoing, which is healthy for any business, especially during this time. I think it's healthy for stakeholders to come together and discuss policy, to discuss tax measures, and see how best we can support each other.
Some of the taxes being negotiated include duties on imported textile, garments, and rental income tax, among others. The traders also want taxes on petrol and diesel reduced.
Businesses are very critical. If government is to get taxes tomorrow, businesses must first of all be there. There must be operation. If businesses close, then there's no way how are we going to address the revenue shortfall. So government is starting to see the light.
The government has also created a COVID-19 relief fund worth $56.5 million to help cushion small businesses affected by the lockdown. Some economic analysts argue that in order to revive the economy, the government should start using taxation as a tool of development beyond revenue collection. They believe some taxes should be suspended to enable businesses to flourish. Traders say the 12% levy on internet data has made internet consumption very expensive for businesses.
That's really unnecessary and counterproductive because so many people are using these platforms to trade, you know. So such taxes can be waived for the time being.
But for traders like Shams Din Shero and many others, the future remains uncertain, largely due to the unpredictable path of the COVID-19 pandemic that has so far killed close to 3,000 people. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Egypt will start issuing sukuk or Sharia-compliant Islamic bonds. This is after President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi ratified the sovereign sukuk law, which had been approved by Parliament in June. Authorities in the North African state had earlier said that the sukuk will help finance the country's social and economic development projects. Yasser Hakim reports from Cairo.
Egypt is set to tap into a new monetary tool that will fund its budget, diversify and also extend the average maturity of the country's debt. The sukuk is a form of bonds with Islamic Sharia law regulations and is based on profit sharing and partnerships rather than fixed interest rates. It's a huge untapped international market that Egyptian government is eyeing.
It is a financial mechanism used to fund specific projects, and the profit of this project is distributed to sukuk owners. It ends with the maturity of the project itself. The advantage of the sukuk is that it attracts investors in productive and developmental projects, and the investor accepts there could be a profit or loss, which is a very important point. Sukuk have been very successful in several countries, including in Malaysia, where it started. The UAE invested $200 billion in sukuk to finance infrastructure projects, and most of Saudi Arabia's electricity and energy projects are through sukuk. Even the UK has issued £200 million sterling of sukuk.
According to the Ministry of Finance, the proceeds from sukuk bonds will help the government achieve its target of reducing the budget deficit from 7.1% to 6.1%, and to fund billions of dollars of investments in mega infrastructure and construction projects.
Once the final state budget expenditure plan is approved, we expect the government's first issuance alone to be for $1.5 billion in the first phase, because there are many national projects that need financing, and international financial institutions are waiting to invest here because of the strength of the Egyptian economy.
The private sector is also keen to make use of the Islamic finance mechanism. 4 private sector sukuk are in pipeline worth more than $500 million, and 2 more are expected to be issued before the year's end. Yes Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. The private sector is at the forefront of driving ties between China and African nations. And China's first negative list for cross-border services takes effect.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
A new report credits private businesses for driving ties between China and African nations. The study from the Chinese Africa Business Council was released on Thursday during an event in Beijing jointly organized by CGTN. It says Chinese investment has helped Africa's industrialization and has improved lives on the continent. It also credits Chinese companies for playing an active role in Africa's efforts to reduce poverty and fight COVID-19. Africa has been a major source of investment for China in recent years, and speakers at the event say it's helping meet broad development goals. China has been Africa's largest trading partner for the past 12 years. Trade exceeded $200 billion in 2019. That's 20 times more than at the start of this century. Chinese direct investment in Africa reached nearly $3 billion last year. About 70% of that was in the private sector. Officials say most of the staff in Chinese businesses operating in Africa are locals. Meanwhile, 46 African countries have joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. CGTN's Zhong Shi sat down with Ling Yifu, who is the Deputy Director of the Economic Committee of the CPPCC. He said Chinese investment in Africa is win-win cooperation, which benefits Chinese companies and provides more opportunities for African development.
Professor Ling, welcome to CGTN.
It's my pleasure.
When people think of investment, Chinese investment in Africa, they immediately think of the massive infrastructure projects undertaken by China's state-owned enterprises, building roads, highways, bridges, and ports in Africa. But in fact, data tell us more than 70% of Chinese companies investing in the continent are now private firms. Professor, what has been the draw for those private companies, and how do they compare to their state-owned peers?
I think certainly it represents
the economic opportunity for the private sectors. But at the same time, investment and trade, just like trade, is always win-win. It's not only benefit Chinese companies, but also benefit job generations in Africa to transform African competitive advantages into producing goods that they can export to the global markets or to compete in their domestic markets with imported goods. And so they will generate more jobs, more opportunity for the African development.
The report on Chinese investment in Africa, which was released today, has also listed obstacles to Chinese investment in Africa. We're talking about political instability. We're talking about local laws and regulations, also a lack of talent and those cultural differences. How do you suggest we tackle these issues?
For the political instability, first, not all the African countries encounter those kind of problems. There's only a few countries. We need to understand there are 54 countries in Africa. And, country with political instability just abundant. So the majority of African countries actually are stable. And the secondly, certainly, they have different legal systems. So we need to understand their culture, their legal system, in order to do our business there. But certainly, we can also improve by, the bilateral arrangement, to, voice our concern, and they can also, modify their business environment and so on to make investment in Africa more investment friendly.
Tunisian President Kais Saied has hailed the fruitful cooperation between Tunisia and China in recent years, while praising Chinese companies for contributing to Tunisia's digital economy. The North African head of state made the remarks during a meeting with He Tao, the president of Huawei Northern African region. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi has more from Tunis.
In a meeting held at Carthage Palace in the Tunisian capital, the head of state welcomed the opportunities for partnership between Tunisia and China. President Kais Saied stressed his commitment to strengthen this partnership, particularly in the sectors of education, teaching, transport and health. Experts have also lauded Chinese companies' contribution to the North African state's digital economy.
I think the President Saied meeting with the chairman of Huawei North Africa region at this time carries the message that Tunisia seeks to develop and expand its partnership with China's companies, bearing in mind that China is a world economic and technological power.
The president of Huawei Northern Africa region announced the creation of a research, development and innovation center in Tunisia and said it's likely to become a technology hub in Africa. Tunisian experts say digitalization is a catalyst for economic growth in the country.
Developing the relations between Tunisia and Huawei in search and G5 technology will definitely bring great benefits to both parties. We should not forget that Tunisia is the gateway of Africa with an excellent and empowered generation of engineers.
The Huawei official also said his company is committed to continue supporting Tunisia through contributing in particular to the implementation of the medical city in Kharwan, the creation of jobs and skills training.
Huawei's support to Tunisia is endless. The new partnership agreement will allow for the creation of new job opportunities. Huawei is a world technology and innovation leader. It will help create competitive companies in the technology sector in Tunisia.
According to the Tunisian presidency, the Chinese multinational telecommunications equipment and services company is also willing to expand partnerships with universities and educational institutions throughout Tunisia and equip them with computer labs. Technology experts assert that Huawei is contributing to digital transformation in the world through modern infrastructure and ICT solutions. The Chinese company is also sharing its experience with many countries in order to boost the ICT ecosystem by offering new services. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Representatives from over 60 nations are participating in the virtual ESG Global Leaders Summit to discuss topics such as ESG investment, sustainable development, and low-carbon transition. In her keynote speech, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says all countries must take concerted efforts to cope with climate change challenges. China's efforts to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060 are laudable, as are the steps to boost the green finance industry, green finance standards, pilot information sharing platforms, and better environmental information disclosure. China's former Vice Minister of Finance, Zhu Guangyao, says that preparations for negotiations which focus on international sustainability standards are set to start during the Global Climate Change Conference in November. Funds like exchange-traded funds and mutual funds often consider a wide range of factors consistent with their objectives and strategies when selecting investments. The highly popular ESG funds are among the most attractive options for investors. CGTN Zhang Shishuan has more.
ESG fund investors have a variety of goals: sustainable investing, socially responsible investing, and impact investing. Ni Jiawei has made his priority funds holding shares in new energy vehicles. He began looking at investments in ESG funds last year, when China announced its goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2060. This year, he's already made a 10% return on his ESG investment.
So far this year, ESG funds have nicely outperformed my other funds, like Baijiu, which is still down 5% for the year. I started with funds in new energy, which fits with the country's green strategy and also with the consumption trends. And I feel like NEVs are close to the way I want to live.
As of the middle of July, there were 164 ESG funds in China, focusing on projects in new energy, environmental protection, and carbon reduction. They are growing quickly, driven by China's pursuit of green and sustainable development. And they're attracting plenty of individual investors like me, creating large potential market for financial institutions. During the first half of the year, sales of ESG funds through Standard Chartered Bank in China were up 18 times from the same period last year. Funds related to environmental protection were up 38 times. Standard Chartered is looking for more.
We're working to screen for more domestic publicly offered funds that meet our standards, and we're hoping to work with well-known international ESG rating agencies to offer risk evaluation statistics for our clients. An increasing number of high net worth individuals are interested in having 100% sustainable investment portfolios. So we're developing more ESG investment portfolio models for them.
More diversified ESG funds are emerging in the domestic market, in exchange-traded funds or ETFs, thanks to a greater emphasis on green and sustainable development on the part of A-share listed companies. As of the end of last month, the China Securities Index Company had 74 indexes related to ESG or sustainable development investments. 45 financial products have been launched based on those indexes. Together, they're worth more than 61 billion yuan, an increase of almost 40% from this March.
In the long run, ESG indexes can perform very well. The annualized return rate of the CSI 300 ESG index is 1% higher than that of the CSI 300 index. And the annualized return rate of the CSI 500 ESG index is 2.3% higher than that of the CSI 500 index. ESG investments from old age pension will play a leading role. More pension funds are being put into ESG investments around the globe and are showing good results for institutional investors.
China has committed to peaking carbon emissions by 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality by 2060. Experts predict the costs of this will be both high and uneven across the country, and that the process could require more than 100 trillion yuan of total investment. Getting investors to part with that money could take some convincing.
Cultivating long-term green investment awareness among individual investors is very important to enhance the attractiveness of green funds. High cost of information searching is another reason that restricting the investment behavior of individual investors. Therefore, information disclosure should be further improved to enhance confidence of investors.
China's central bank has announced that it will give priority to ESG-themed investments and encourage long-term social funds to direct their money into them. As of the end of June, more than 4,000 public-private partnership financing agreements in pollution prevention and other green low-carbon projects had been signed in China. Their total investment values came to 4.1 trillion yuan. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
China's first negative list for cross-border services has taken effect this Thursday. Officials say the reform is expected to spur the high-quality development of the Hainan Free Trade Port and unleash the potential of China's cross-border services trade.
China's first negative list in cross-border services clearly lists 70 special measures across 11 categories for overseas service providers. All the areas not on the list enjoy equal access to engage in the cross-border services trade in the Hainan Free Trade Port. When China joined the World Trade Organization, the country promised to launch a positive list for cross-border services. Officials say the launch of the first negative list marks a significant breakthrough in China's management model toward services trade and reflects its determination to keep in line with international economic and trade rules.
The negative list system for the cross-border services trade is conducive to Hainan's creation of a legal, international, and convenient business environment, gathering global innovative elements and resources, and enhancing the quality and international influence of free trade in Hainan.
The list deepens the high-level opening of Hainan in areas ranging from professional services and transportation to finance. It relaxes restrictions on foreign yachts entering and exiting the Hainan Free Trade Port. Lin Wo, SSTV for CGTN.
Still in China, enterprises have been reaping gains from the zero-tariff policy implemented at the Hainan Free Trade Port last year. Preferential policies helped businesses save over 460 million yuan, or about $70 million in taxes by the end of July. Products such as helicopters and yachts find a place in the list as transport and tourism businesses registered in Hainan are entitled to import duty exemptions. Meanwhile, the government has also been improving the customs supervision system in order to further support the development of Hainan Free Trade Zone. In the world of films, the word is out that the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die, will be released on September 28th. The release date was pushed back 3 times since the outbreak of the pandemic in March 2020, as movie theaters closed their doors. But this time around, it sounds like it might actually be happening.
The announcement from the official Bond Twitter account countered speculation in entertainment media that the movie's release might be delayed again. James Bond movies are among the most valuable film franchises in Hollywood. The 2015 Spectre raked in $880 million at the box office worldwide, while Skyfall in 2012 grossed more than $1 billion globally.
I think a break was what I needed, and then a chance to just, kind of like the thing about unfinished business, something that kind of, should I have done that? And I was free. Yeah, I had some time, so I thought I'd do it.
And the Bond villain in No Time to Die says people should expect something very special.
This film, and I think we're going to have a very unique perspective on who I'm playing and how I'm playing him.
If we don't do this, there will be nothing left to save.
The red carpet world premiere for the film will take place in London on September the 28th. 谢谢 CGTN。
Let's look at commodities. Oil fell today for the first session this week as renewed concerns about demand amid rising COVID-19 infections cut short a three-day rally, and as Mexico restored some oil production. The U.S. Energy Information Administration reported that American crude inventories fell last week for a third consecutive week, and overall fuel demand increased to the most since March 2020. The return of output in Mexico, where fire on an offshore platform on Sunday killed at least 5 workers and knocked out about 400,000 barrels a day of production, is also weighing on prices. And more broadly, fresh COVID-19 outbreaks fueled by the Delta variant of the coronavirus are raising concerns about the strength of the economic recovery globally. Still ahead on Global Business. Expanding business opportunities and online trade in Somalia.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Somalia is recording notable growth in online trade in its major cities. This has been attributed to availability and access to mobile money, as well as the fragile stability in the country. The country earns billions of US dollars through mobile transactions every month. The boom in earnings, diversified transactions and cheap internet data has created a conducive environment for the youthful population to open businesses.
Most goods in Somalia are imported from China due to the affordable nature of the goods. And with the emergence of the one-stop shopping centers, traders can now buy multiple goods in one store. Mohamed Mohamoud, founder and CEO of Somar, launched the online company to reach the customers first. Unlike conventional international online platforms that only accept credit and debit cards, Somar provides a homegrown solution, mobile money.
There's a big market in China. It's a global market. We chose that market because it is a one-stop shopping for us. We can get different items with cheap prices in one shop, and that is what motivated us to import goods from China. E-commerce needs proper mechanism in place, and we need to get quality photos of our products that will help the customer to properly view the item they want to buy. Our suppliers in China enabled us to get photos and videos that would allow our customers to make decisions based on the products they want to buy.
Going online has eased business operations for the company, much to the satisfaction of the clients.
I like shopping from Somar because they deliver orders instantly without going to the hassle in town while at home or in your shop.
The coronavirus pandemic had an impact on delivery for most businesses.
COVID-19 was the major challenge we faced for the last 2 years. Our customers couldn't get their orders on time. We also had another challenge since most people stayed home and wanted to shop online, and their orders couldn't sometimes be available in the market due to restrictions. These are the main challenges we faced. We still face the challenges caused by COVID-19 restrictions.
Operating an e-business in a country with a weaker regulatory framework and insecurity presents various challenges.
The first challenge we faced was the payment system, but with the help of the telecommunication companies in the market, it is now resolved. The second issue was the means of delivery and transporting of goods. When we started, there was no company doing delivery in the country, so we had to establish our own.
The launch of e-commerce has made shopping easier for residents, presenting a sense of new hope for the business landscape in the Horn of Africa nation. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Conventional wisdom may say that everything tastes like chicken, but poultry consumers in Burkina Faso beg to differ. They insist their chicken is one of a kind, as CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma reports.
The birds from the Sahelian nation of Burkina Faso do not make for an ordinary delicacy, at least according to poultry consumers here who say the chicken, known as bicycle chicken, are in a league of their own.
The local chicken is very good. We meet with friends and eat. It's very good, very natural. It really allows us to get together. It's excellent compared to other chickens. When it's natural, we can eat without it being harmful to our health.
Bicycle chicken is a locally reared species of fowl, traditionally delivered on the backs of bicycles and motorcycles.
Chickens are 8 months old before being consumed, while broilers, GMO chickens, are at most 40 days old. There is not too much fat in the local chickens, but the broilers, because they are fed with feed, if you kill them, there is too much fat that can make you sick. That's why it is not the same thing.
If the bicycle chicken is labeled today, it would be a very good thing for everyone, for us who eat it, the consumers, and the national economy as a whole.
The government has taken the cue and embarked on a mission to label and brand bicycle chicken.
We are in the process of branding. It is not yet completely done because it takes time. It is a set of activities, of meetings as well, at the level of the services of the state, as well as at the level of the processors of the bicycle chicken, and even the breeders. So we are in the process of meeting with all of them so that afterwards we officially recognize that our local chicken is called bicycle chicken.
The sale of bicycle chicken is gaining traction. According to figures from the Ministry of Animal Resources, approximately 130,000 chicken are delivered each day to wholesalers, restaurants and individual consumers across the country's 2 largest cities, Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso. Yaya Bogoma owns a restaurant that grills and roasts chicken. He hopes that the labeling scheme will validate bicycle chicken's superior quality and secure its place at the top of the market.
This is my main job. My family and I make a living out of it. I also employ 25 people and they all live from this.
Those who enjoy a good roasted chicken wing are most excited for bicycle chicken to get the recognition they say it has long deserved. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
And finally, a look at the currencies. The South African rand was fairly flat this morning, but held below the 15 to the dollar handle, a sharp about turn from 15.30 to the dollar a week ago, which was the weakest level since March. Analysts have said South Africa's currency is likely to be volatile in the weeks ahead as investors await the timeline for the reduction of U.S. monetary stimulus, which has supported currencies that offer relatively higher returns. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business Tonight. We invite your feedback, send it to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.